Thanks and welcome. Hope it gets warmer soon because I'm freezing. So what I do in HP, what I've done for the last 2 years in HP is I've actually done research into what's going to happen in the future. It started off all sorts of things, very wide-ranging, but really of late it's come down to this idea of digital disruption. In other words, the use of digitization to change the way things happen. So let me just give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. Please tell me if you can't hear me. Apparently I've got to stand within a certain distance of this thing, but I don't know quite sure what the distance is. So here's an example of an industry that is going to be disrupted. This is the transportation industry. That guy there is a self-driving car. This is a shared car. This is a car where Uber, we all know about Uber. It's already disrupted the taxi business in San Francisco. 70% of taxis no longer exist. This here is a General Electric train. You don't buy the train. It's like a cloud service. So you have some tracks, you get the train, and the train, as you use it, you pay for it. They've put predictive maintenance in there using big data to make sure that if something's going to go wrong, they fix it proactively. This, of course, is the system that's inside your car, because if it's self-driving, what are you going to do? You're going to work and you're going to be entertained. And this is something that has not passed Apple and Google by. This here is an ambulance from Newcastle. In Newcastle now, as you get towards the traffic lights and you're an emergency ambulance, it will change the lights, but also it will tell you as a driver exactly how fast to drive in order to make it through all the traffic. So these are all kind of data points as to how digitisation is going to change the transportation industry. If we jump forward 5 years, I think we can see London having a load of autonomous cars, in other words, cars that can drive themselves, and you literally say, I want to go from here to here. It will predict where the best car is, it will give you that journey, and it'll let that car go to somebody else. So if you're in the transportation business, if you're making cars, or if you are associated with, say, London Transport, these kinds of things are hugely useful. I think inside cities, 5 years from now, our transportation will have been disrupted, and it will have been disrupted by digitisation. Here's another example. This guy here is Jamie Dimon. He is the CPO of JP Morgan, largest financial services institution in the world. 2 months ago, he wrote a letter to all the shareholders, and it started by saying Silicon Valley is coming. I've talked to a lot of banks recently about digital disruption, and they are all very, very concerned. There are 2,000 financial services startups who are going to do next generation payments. And of course, Apple Pay, if you're doing your payments using Apple, why exactly do I need the bank? Why don't I just have Apple as my bank? So there's a lot going on here. We also have Bitcoin here, which is two things. It's a new currency, but also it's a way of doing financial transactions and reconciling them within 10 minutes and not 3 days. This is WeChat. This is the equivalent of WhatsApp in China. They were one of the first in-app payment mechanisms. And there are people in China who are now regularly making payments for things using their chat system. So you could imagine Facebook, Snapchat already offers that. So this is another market that's going to be digitally disrupted very, very quickly. Now, I'm a huge fan of Geoffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm Inside the Tornado. If any of you are considering, shall we SaaS, or shall we put things out to cloud, or should we do them in-house, he has a wonderful model called Core and Context as to what you should keep in your data center and what you might let somebody else do. The guy, in my mind, is a genius. Fortunately for us, he started writing about this digital disruption space. And he says there are 3 sorts of disruption. The first is IT disruption. This is cloud, SaaS, bring your own device, virtualization. These typically don't affect the business. So in HP, we've gone from Siebel to Salesforce.com as a SaaS service. I would suggest that our business partners and our customers probably didn't notice a huge amount of difference. But it's been disruptive to IT. The next one up, I think, is much more important. This is where we change or disrupt the business operations model. We make it easier for people to do business. So Netflix has made it much easier for all of us to get a video and get a film. We have mobile banking, which makes it, when I'm coming back from a business trip on my phone, I just pay the taxi driver. Boom, much easier. Mobile online check-in is much easier. Google Nest learns as you go around the house what you need in terms of your comfort, in terms of temperature, and it does that. And we're starting to see the advent of drone deliveries. What we're doing here is we're using digitization and we are changing business operations. The business model hasn't changed, but my goodness, haven't we made it much easier to do things? The top one is where whole sectors are going to disappear. So if you were, a taxi driver in San Francisco, you'll know all about Uber. YouTube has changed the monetization, the business model for video. Now a 16-year-old kid can sit in their room and earn $150,000 a year talking about makeup or whatever they talk about. Spotify has changed the music business, Salesforce.com, Siebel, does Siebel still exist? I think it probably does, but it's made a huge difference. Autonomous cars. Uber did a survey in London. They reckon that they can get rid of 66% of the traffic in London by having autonomous cars. 3D parts printing. I was in Saudi Arabia 3 weeks ago. IDC was running a conference. They estimate that 50 to 60% of all spares by the year 2022 or something will be printed. In other words, if you're DHL and you used to have a business in providing just-in-time parts, maybe you should think about becoming a 3D printer owner where you can actually print these parts, stick them on a drone and send them out. And then Amazon Prime. I use Amazon Prime. I have not been to my local city for about 4 months. It's just, there's the roadworks going on, the parking's expensive. I just go, get me some stuff, and it arrives the next day. The key thing here is we are disrupting business models. We are changing the way the business happens, and it's being done because of digitization. Now, if you are an Uber or a Spotify or a Salesforce.com, as I said, you are attacking the business model. But let's imagine you are an incumbent in your market. Let's say you are an incumbent in banking, or you're an incumbent in the airline business, an incumbent in car manufacturing. What do? Well, again, going back to my hero, Geoffrey Moore, what you don't do is you try and disrupt your own business. And the reason he says that's most important here is because you have an ecosystem. You have all sorts of partners around you that actually allow you to generate profit. If you go and disrupt your business model, you'll lose your ecosystem and then you won't get your profit. So what we as incumbents, and HP is most certainly an incumbent, and we need to think about is what do we do to use digitization to disrupt our business operations. So very often when I go and talk to people about this stuff, we get onto this conversation here. And we do this through something Geoffrey Moore has also pioneered called systems of engagement. In other words, let's make it really easy to do business with us as an airline, as a bank or whatever, and then probably the threat of a business model disruption would go away. So what do these disruptors do? They probably do three things that we couldn't do before. And they can do it because their product is digital. It has an application inside it that we can change. So the first thing is they start very quickly, they enter the market very quickly with a minimum viable product. And I don't know if any of you guys are working on digital innovation teams, but some of the things that your guys will be thinking about is saying, what can we get out there in the market? Let's just get something out there. Google Mail, the first version that went out there was pretty primitive. I'm a Spotify fanatic. The first version I used was primitive. The first version of Google Nest was primitive. The Tesla S, which is this wonderful Tesla electric car, when it first came out, it couldn't do self-parking. And then about 6 months ago, overnight, there was a software update, and all of a sudden, this thing can self-park. Next week, it will be able to go along the freeway automatically without your hands on the steering wheel. You didn't have to take it into garage, you just did a software update overnight. So we start with something minimal and we increase it. We publicly experiment. So this is something you're seeing a lot. Google Glass, for example. We have a lot of customers like Twitter who will put out, you don't know this, but they'll have 3 or 4 different versions of a user interface, and they will use experimentation to decide which one to use. There is a Chinese phone manufacturer, they don't sell in the UK, I can't pronounce their name, but they will put out 3 or 4 different versions of their phone, and they will use data to determine which people like most, and then they'll manufacture that one. The key point from all this, I think, is we are continuously innovating. In other words, Tesla has a version out now, but they're already testing the next version, and they're coding the next version, and the next version is in limited rollout. We've got continuous innovation, and therefore we've got continuous delivery of our software